Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this BARA webinar, which is on using automation for sustainability, which is so for the for the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about automation and its use in sustainability and how it can help reach net zero goals and help with climate change as well. We're just holding on for a couple of seconds before we start in earnest, I think, well, because I can see that we've got people joining as I speak. Okay, I think probably we're in a good position to start properly now. Before I introduce the panel, I'm just going to whiz through some quick housekeeping rules. So just to let you know that the webinar session today is being recorded. All attendees' mics have been set to mute by default. When a panelist is ready to speak, please use the mute button to unmute yourself. We encourage audience participation, so please use the Q&A button to ask a question. From past experience, we do get the most interesting conversations from audience questions, so it would be really great if you could let us know your questions throughout the presentation. Also, if your question is aimed specifically at a particular member of the panel, it would be really good if you could let us know that as well, so we can direct your question towards the right person. Just to say, don't put any websites or company promotion in the chat box, otherwise you will be unceremoniously removed from the webinar. Chatham House rules. A Chatham House rule applies. A show reel from today's event will be available on bara.org.uk along with an accompanying press release. And final housekeeping note is that at the end of the webinar, there's going to be a short survey that's going to pop up on your screen, and we would be really grateful if you could just take a couple of minutes to complete that. Okay, so looking here, yeah, we've got quite a few, well, a very good number of people live in the audience. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel. First of all, well, in no particular order, actually, we've got George Thompson, who is Robotic Systems Sales Manager at Goodell Linear Tech UK. And George is also chair of BARA. We've got Nikesh Mistry, who is head of Industrial Automation Sector at Gambika. Oliver Selby, who is head of sales at Fanuc UK. Ian Jackson from the Society of Operations Engineers. And Charlotte Horrobin, who is Region Director, Midlands and East of England at Make UK. And my name is Charlotte Stonestreet. I'm the editor of Controls, Drives and Automation, and I'm going to be sort of chairing the session today. I think, but we're really fortunate today in that our panel actually consists of mainly people from associations. So it's quite an unusual situation. To kind of take advantage of that, I'd really like to just go to each of the panel members in turn to kind of gauge what the industrial sector and the industrial and engineering sector is thinking about sustainability and net zero goals, that kind of things. I mean, is this issue important to your members and indeed the people that you meet day to day in the industrial sector? Or, you know, does it play second fiddle to, I don't know, global pandemics or energy crisis, or even just the normal everyday challenges of running a successful business? I'm going to go to George first with that, please.
How did I know you were coming to me first? Thank you very much for the question. I think the short answer is yes, it is becoming more and more prevalent in everyone's conversations that they're having. It's more to do with how can I save energy? And that seems to be a very popular question that I'm getting at anyway, especially for some of the Foundry applications that Goodell look at. But it's also about how can we help promote other things. How can we generate more business in the UK? And to do that, we need automation to make us more competitive.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask the same question to Charlotte, because I know that at Make UK, obviously, it's not just anecdotal evidence that you're working with. You actually do regular surveys of all your members who, you have a really good overview on this.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to just focus on the backdrop at the moment. I'll use one anecdote. I've got a company with 3 UK sites. They can't get certain components to be able to complete the job and make sure that their customer receives goods. Their pay's gone up, their energy bills increased by 500%. So on the face of it, we're challenged by the highest kind of vacancy rates we've seen in manufacturing, currently at 85,000, and that's softened a little bit. We've got a very uncompetitive, very volatile energy market. But the positive news is actually 2/3 of our members over the last 18 months, from pretty much a standing start, have taken action towards becoming more sustainable and achieving their net zero goals. And actually, I think what's really heartening is that actually another 9 in 10 plan to do something further in the next 12 months. So whilst it might feel like a really difficult time, and there's plenty of excuses as to why we perhaps shouldn't be focusing on sustainability, what we're practically seeing is that businesses are going, and doing the right thing. But to George's point, they are doing this in a logical sense as well, going after energy efficiency, trying to reduce the amount of energy that they're using. But then the subsequent changes to design, the way that they manufacture, the way that they market, and who they sell what to, I think is really interesting.
Great, thanks. And Nikesh, is this something that you're familiar with as well amongst the Gambika membership?
Yeah, exactly that. Just to sort of add to what Charlotte was saying, it's the increase in energy saving applications that I can see really enhancing over not only just the past few years, but even prior to these crises that we've seen. We've obviously got a massive increase in the energy costs, but even before that, a lot of our members were starting to take a look at energy saving applications, knowing that profitability and efficiency are a knock-on effect of doing those sorts of things. So they were taking the time to look at ways they can improve their own processes, and energy efficiency is one of them. And speaking for the Gambika members in my sector, the industrial automation, a lot of the products that they produce are contributions to energy saving overall. So variable speed drives, soft starters, ways to control your motors and things like that are actually products which, if you implement them into your factories, they actually have the effect of helping you become more energy efficient. So we've seen a massive increase over the past couple of years in applications for these products in particular. So it's great to see the industry heading in that positive direction towards it.
Right. So Ian, same question to you really. Are these people's attitudes towards sustainability, net zero, are you seeing changes in those? Well,
in the society operations engineers, sustainability has been a bit of an issue for a few years now. We've been struggling with it because until recently, in our constitution of why we exist, we cover that we're there to promote safety, efficiency, and we used to say environmental sustainability in relation to the operation of plant and equipment and such like. And hearing what people just been saying, that environmental sustainability didn't really align with what people have been talking about just now. And so we've altered our position. So we're now still on safety, efficiency. We've brought in ethics, but also we've dropped environmental and just say sustainability, which just listening to this conversation here reflects it better. Just before I came on to this talk, I just quickly checked what is sustainability. And the first thing that came up on the internet was sustainability is the idea that humans must interact with the environment in a way that ensures there will be enough resources left for future generations. Now that's great, but if you're going down that line, think about climate change. because a lot of the things we're doing at the moment were maybe helping sustainability, but they're working against tackling climate change as we understand it now. So it's a bit of an issue of what is sustainability. I think I'm with what I've heard. It's wider than just the environment. It's about the sustainability of your business. It's the sustainability of what you are trying to bring forward. Because we have a lot of military people in our organisation, operational ones, and I've always got a little bit of a problem with what's the sustainability of a bullet in a gun? But if it's, can we source that military piece of equipment? Yes. Is it sustainable to source it? But is military activity sustainable? Huge different debate. And that's why I leave it there, say the sustainability of your organisation seems to be the thing that we should be looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some really important issues that you raised there. Of course, so the whole idea of sustainability is to a certain extent so all-encompassing. It's really difficult to kind of view it in isolation or even put your finger on what a kind of proper meaning should be. Before we move on, I just wanted to kind of put that question to Oliver as well, but obviously not to his what he's seeing out in the marketplace, not to the members of his society. So, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, so what we see is that customers now coming to us with much more clearly defined requirements of specification for their automation needs, which is great. You know, it's perfect for as a supplier to get a very clear understanding of what is needed. And more now we're seeing that customers are looking for energy efficiency is a clear sort of must-have within the specification, but also being able to track and trace and understand how the product has been manufactured, the number of hours, the number of CO2 units has been produced or used in its production, you know, is absolutely critical. So actually, as a manufacturer of equipment, we are now much more focused on actually being able to deliver that type of information when required to those manufacturers that are looking for it. You know, the range of products we manufacture are very well aligned to sustainable manufacture, but it's actually providing the information, the right information at the right time, at the point of purchase, you know, so they can actually fully commit to their commitments to their stakeholders.
Okay, yeah, I think basically the importance of communication when it comes to sustainability is just at the top. It should be at the top of the agenda for everyone, really. Moving on, one of the points that we are going to cover is the possibility of using automation to remove waste from, for example, a manufacturing process. I think that George is a good person to talk about this because he does have experience of it. So George, if you'd like to just sort of give us an overview of how automation can be used to remove waste.
Thank you. There's lots of different ways. It can be reducing waste products by improving the quality. It can be putting too much material down or too little material down when you're doing a dispensing application or a welding process. It can also be something as simple as how much wrap you put on a pallet at the end of the line. I have sadly been in numerous factories where I've seen people running around pallets with stretch wrap, and you can never quite get it tight enough to make an effective seal and stack on the pallet itself. And when I was selling wrappers many years ago, there was a stat that kind of shocked me. And by using either an automated or a semi-automated wrapper, you can reduce the plastic usage by 30%. And that's something that is, you know, it pays for itself in virtually no time at all. and you don't have people running around pallets, as one very small example.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So obviously a key part of any automation strategy these days is Industry 4, digitalisation, IoT, whatever phrase you like to use. Nikesh, can you talk to us a little bit about how Industry 4 can be used a way of driving waste reduction within the manufacturing process, or even the supply chain, overall industry?
Sure. It comes up quite a lot in our discussions amongst our membership, where we're talking about how the journey to digitalization is very similar to your journey in sustainability, and that is you need to look at what the business problem is. What problem are you trying to solve in order to implement a particular type of technology? Now, Industry 4 has a whole bunch of different technologies with loads of buzzwords that are thrown around all the time. And sometimes, it doesn't require all or even a full solution. It might only require, I think George touched on it, a small change at the end of a packaging line or something like that, which might have a big impact on your final results. And I think that's one of the key points to using Industry 4 technologies to sort of to influence your sustainability goals. And for example, using preventative maintenance or predictive maintenance is a way of making sure that for example, if you've got a fluid that might be getting contaminated over time, you're using a sensor that might make sure that you can exchange that liquid in enough time to prevent any downtime on your machinery. That's just a small little example of one that I had a case study of very recently from a member that I can keep in my head. So it's something like a small sensor that you install into your system, which will allow you to then prevent your downtime or shutdown time when you actually need to change over your materials or your actual processes. So it's these small factors which actually help to influence, or these small incremental things that can help. And I think it's about moving towards this preventative or predictive environment rather than reactive. Our society is always working in a reactive way. We wait for something to happen and then we act on it, and that usually can be too late. So what these Industry 4 technologies allow you to do is allows you to be ahead of time. You can see problems happening. Artificial intelligence works in that way, where you can actually use these technologies to see something happening before it actually causes you an issue, and that's going to cause you a lot of saving in cost, time, efficiency, profitability, and all sorts. It's going to save your own employees time as well. That's a few of the points that I could add.
Yeah. I mean, we've had a question come in from the audience asking whether anyone knows of any examples of digital twin being used in relation to sustainability. I mean, I know that there must be application examples, but off the top of my head, I can't think of a specific one. Do any of the panels?
I can certainly give you an example. So, for example, within the simulation of automation at the point of sale or as an aftermarket service, we can actually optimize and the process to be as energy efficient based on a number of factors, whether that's energy usage of a robot, for example, to just meet cycle time, for example. But we can actually optimize the whole automation process to ensure that you just meet the requirement of the business with using as little energy as possible. And that's being sort of derived from the way the software is actually driving it, So it's a good example of kind of the way in which we may look to the future. Certainly us as a business, we will actually push aftermarket services for energy optimization, because everyone's looking for that next saving. you know, whether that's reduction in waste or reduction in energy usage or something else, you know, spare parts, for example. If we can optimize to meet the requirements of the business to reduce those, then that's a good way forward.
Great. I've also had another question in that is specifically for you again, Oliver, but also obviously the other panelists, if they have anything to add here. And is the ability to easily retask a system for future requirements a key issue for end users, i.e. future-proofing?
It is, and it's been dealt with in a number of ways, in that most manufacturers of certainly robotics now, sort of where I'm coming from, robots can be retasked, reused, reutilized in other applications. So, for example, it's quite typical to see at the end of a production line or the use of robots in a production line for automotive. Those robots become available again after, say, an overhaul or a maintenance, available again for a different application, whether that's packaging or use in the construction industry, for example, packing bricks or whatever it may be. You know, robots typically have 16 to 25-year life, but they're only ever used in a particular application probably for about 8 to 10, depending on who you talk to. You know, typical automotive robots are used for sort of 8 to 12 years maybe, and then they're used again somewhere else. So to actually be able to reutilize and reload software if needed to actually meet the requirements of that next application is obviously one of the key considerations we think about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, I often wonder, in terms of sustainability, is it better to replace your equipment with the most energy efficient up-to-date models, or is it better for the environment to keep going with what you've got and therefore avoid the manufacture of that equipment in the first place?
That's a very difficult question to answer, because we provide such a huge range of products, from products that weigh a few grams, if you like, in terms of fuses, all the way through to robots that weigh 13 tons. The actual usage of energy in their manufacture is very different. So it's quite difficult there to answer that, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Very application specific.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Let's have a look here. So another question that's come in from the audience is, what opportunities do you see for using simulation for automation and sustainability? I think to a certain extent we've already covered that a little bit in the digital twin. So unless anyone's got anything extra to add, just going to move on to talking about the supply chain and sustainability and automation. And so I suppose that to a certain extent that there have been influences from the pandemic to the war in Ukraine to Brexit. They have all, to a certain extent, disrupted the supply chain. And there are certainly opportunities around reshoring and the way that automation can enable UK companies to reshore. I don't know, Charlotte, if you've seen any evidence of reshoring amongst your members.
Yeah, and you're quite right. We've, 93% of manufacturers were impacted. Their supply chain was disrupted due to COVID, and 87% due to EU exit, and that still continues. In fact, I think at the sort of the initial phases of leaving the EU, 97% of manufacturers in some shape or form faced a degree of disruption. In terms of supply chains, really interesting picture at the moment. So a fifth of manufacturers are telling us that they have reduced the number of suppliers in their supply chain in the last 2 years, but on contrast, 2/5 have actually increased. So it is quite an evolving feast. The interesting point, though, is 2/5 have increased the number of UK-based suppliers, and that is set to continue yet again, another 2/5 moving forwards. I think the general trend is about kind of friendshoring, nearshoring. So if it's not moving something to the UK, because I think we've got to be very astute to the fact we are part of complex international supply chains, and you know, we're a heavy exporter, so it really isn't about everything's made in the UK and only for the UK. I think we're very proud of our positive international relationships, but we are certainly seeing that people are moving operations either to the UK, to Europe, or Turkey is also the very hot spot.
Okay, interesting, thank you. So have any of the other panel members anything to add on the whole supply chain, the supply chain issues? I mean, I don't know whether any of you have had any involvement in sort of last mile deliveries. I'm thinking specifically of the kind of the robots. In Milton Keynes, I know that they've got a system where they have autonomous robots making food deliveries. I think I was reading it saves something like 500,000 miles worth of car journeys since it was implemented. So obviously that's got huge gains in terms of sustainability. Does anyone else have any examples of the supply chain and how automation can help there?
I think we've got to be careful about saying the benefits of the supply chain. We need to also be aware of the risks of going that way, because we got to what we thought was a very efficient system, global, as Charlotte was sort of going there. Now, things may have changed, but if we just say, oh, we've got to be, I'll say onshore, that is the way to go. Without really analysing it, you do risk bringing inefficiencies back in and losing the benefits that we had. COVID was massive, but even if we'd had everything onshore in the UK, how many people were actually working in the UK to supply somebody else? So we've got to be very careful here that we don't just sort of say, oh, the trend is to bring it back. We've got to be looking at what is the optimal for my business. Yeah, does it, if I bring it back, it improves the supply chain, it reduces the supply chain risk potentially, unless there's a general strike in your particular country. But equally, what have I lost by doing that? There was something good before that you were using, and so we need to be very careful that we just don't say, oh, shorten your supply chains, that solves everything, that makes it more efficient, that's more sustainable. It may be the least sustainable. We don't know its reality.
Okay, so again, we're sort of going back to having to take everything into consideration, looking at the bigger picture and not just kind of catching on to one idea and thinking that's the panacea. So in terms of supply chain as well, I've got a note here to maybe address product miles and how, I suppose, you know, by minimising that you how far a product has to travel, you're also aiding sustainability. George, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, the thought process behind that note was simply, we all think about our food miles. We all now think about where our food comes from. I personally, my family, we shop more at farmers market than we ever have. And we try to eat seasonal, and we try to eat local. Why don't we do the same thing with our everyday items? You know, do we need our pens next day or same day? Probably not. And I'm probably shooting myself in the foot here, because some of what we do as Google is logistic supply gantries and so on. So, but in the same thought is, do we need stuff that's made in the Far East or wherever that we could actually physically manufacture, either, if not here in the UK, at least in Europe? You know, shorten those supply chain just a little bit, if not completely, and try to reduce the amount of container ships we have on the open seas. That way I can keep my diesel.
I've just had another question fly in on the back of that, and just saying, is just in time still part of the supply chain strategy?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, exactly. But just in time does bring you that if there's a hiccup, you've got a problem, as we found out.
Yep. All you need is somebody to park their boat across the middle of the Suez Canal and we're in trouble.
Yes, I think that's happened recently, hasn't it?
Yes.
But that doesn't mean to say that just in time is therefore wrong. There was good reason to go there. It's all about, it's hunting around the optimal all the time. But just keep thinking about what overall risk benefits the thing. And that's why the miles, be careful when you're also calculating the miles on container ships. If it was, let's say, a nuclear power container ship, there aren't a lot of CO2 coming out. Engineering generally has the answers, if it's allowed to have a go at it, to solve these things. So if you start and say, oh, it's environmentally unfriendly having a boat going from A to B, why? Oh, because it's producing more CO2. Well, is there a way of that boat operating of that size without any CO2? In theory, yes. So we've got to be very careful here.
Absolutely. I mean, another point that's just come in saying if there's a move away from just in time, does it increase resource consumption in storage facilities? Well, I would imagine it probably does quite a lot. So it's going to fill the void somehow, isn't it? Okay, this is quite an involved question that's coming from the audience. What are the key items of government legislation directing businesses on their sustainability journey? Or is there a level of incentive given to businesses for addressing some area or the same area? Are there plans for government benchmarking of companies or industry? And is there any future potential funding for companies to enable the adoption of automation, particularly where profit margins are very low, for example, food processing? So that is a really quite involved question there. So I don't know whether someone would like to talk about any legislation specifically pertaining to sustainability. Charlotte and Ian are both putting their hands up. Should we go to Charlotte first?
Perfect question. It's almost a sort of exam question for someone working in Make UK. So I feel like my career is resting on this one. Oh. And I will respond with a slightly woolly answer. We've of course got, legal goals towards 2050, but it will depend on your size of business and also what sector you're operating in. Actually, if I go back to the kind of days where I thought Brexit was my only problem, actually, diesel policy and automotive policy changing was probably my bigger headache back in 2019. Plastic packaging tax, as George, alluded to it earlier on. I've got food manufacturers who, because of plastic packaging tax, have moved away from a certain type of packaging only to use twice as much in, a material that's perhaps not favourable. Social values creeping into public procurement, especially around the Ministry of Defence, and how the MOD does want to see those social values, which of course environmental forms a really key part there. And there are various carbon reporting metrics, again, depending on your industry and what size of organisation that you should be adhering to. There is support out there, and actually we're heading towards a spring budget. So my call out would be to representatives who have joined today: engage with your trade associations, engage with your representative bodies, because right now is the time that we're feeding in to the Treasury, making sure that it's a really good environment for you to be able to manufacture and engineer products here in the UK. And it really does have cause and effect. We've, of course, had the super deduction, which will be coming to a close, but, we would really like to see kind of a green super deduction incentives, using a carrot rather than a stick to drive the right behaviours. moving forwards. You've got some interesting work as well going on in decarbonisation clusters. I think there's about 7 of them in the UK, where BAE's had, created a project with, they are all coastal, where you've got high energy usage clusters, chemical industries, etc. So hence they are on the coast. There is only one actually that's inland. Now that's in the Black Country, and that's because it's quite unusual there. We've got a demographic of businesses that are energy intensive, but it's not just a single, say, steel business. So it doesn't always get captured because you've not got this great big giant of, say, British Steel base there. You've got lots of businesses who are all energy intensive. So, there we're looking at, how do you create maybe circular economy? How do you plan for the future and get businesses to invest for the future in, kind of close proximity and reuse resources in a smart way? In terms of support for businesses, Made Smarter is available in the north of England and now the whole of the Midlands, so West Midlands and East Midlands. Again, it always depends on your size and the sector and location, etc. But there is a programme called ACME 4.0, so that provides support for projects around digital transformation, £5,000 to £50,000. So there is support out there, but again, it's not that easy always to work out when you're a busy business leader where to go and who to talk to. But again, you've got brilliant organisations like PPMA, BARA, Gambika, Make UK, all working together to try and make this an easier landscape to signpost you.
Okay, super. Ian, did you want to add to that?
Yes, be wary of government policy. And the reason I say that, Charlotte used some words, decarbonisation, I'll add net zero, and we sort of talk about decarbonisation and all the incentives, but let's be very clear, just stopping using carbon has absolutely no effect on reducing CO2 in the atmosphere. So if you are talking about global warming, if you're going to go for those, be very clear you're going for the incentive scheme, the financial, because you're probably not doing anything towards tackling climate change as we understand it. And you risk losing those subsidies if they're not contractually tied down when the penny eventually drops, that so many of the incentive schemes are increasing CO2 emissions. So you've got an SOE, a big worry, which was how we got involved with looking at carbon dioxide and CO2, was these massive investments are being made in some very questionable engineering and targets. Because decarbonize, you can still use carbon as biomass or fossil fuel, I don't care which one you want to use. But if you've got carbon dioxide, not carbon, capture, there'll be no emissions and you will be helping. But just switching on, because there's huge subsidies, you can claim that you're CO2 free if you burn biofuels. Now those subsidies, when the penny drops, you've got to really think, why am I using it? And what is the risk of going there? Because it's certainly not about helping save the planet. So be very careful. And it's security supply, sustainability. Be very clear why you're doing it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I suppose it's about defining those goals, isn't it? Like everything, there's a cost associated with sustainability. I was kind of wondering whether the panel thought that we just kind of reached a tipping point where it's, can businesses today really afford not to be sustainable? Nikesh, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to touch on what Charlotte was talking about before. I mean, she made a great pitch for getting involved in your trade association or your nearest trade body, because of the advice and help and technical help that we can give and provide to businesses amongst using, setting industry best practice, which really is the way that the industry needs to go. I don't think, the answer to your question, Charlotte, can businesses afford to not try and set sustainability as one of their goals? And really, at the moment, no, they can't. Everybody has it in one of their top 3, if not top 5 goals at the moment. And all of those funding areas that Charlotte mentioned before were fantastic as well. And then there's the IETF fund as well, Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, which is in its phase 2, which is for any projects up to from £100,000, and any business size can get involved. So there are government grants available, and there's you can apply on the website to look at how to get involved in that. But then even on top of that is the experts that are in all of our member companies. All of us have members, and the experts are within those companies, and now they get together and discuss the standard side of things, the legislation side of things. And if businesses are following the Eco Design Directive, the WE Directive, ROS Directive, Energy Labelling Directive, all of these directives that are put into place in order to, they're extending their scopes currently to try and liaise with those similar regulations and directives in Europe. And the idea is to improve efficiency, reduce your emissions on all energy-related products, from fridges to your drives, right the way through all sorts of devices. And the same goes for the WE Directive and the waste electronic and electrical equipment. So really and truly, look for these pointers, look for advice in how to manufacture products. Some of these, they might not be known to a lot of manufacturers that their company are complying to these. And the more you look into these regulations, the better for yourselves.
Great, thanks for that. Just pulling the conversation back more specifically to automation. I've heard it said recently that rather than relying on future development of kind of world-changing technologies, we need to concentrate on the somewhat boring here and now that can still make a real difference. And I was just wondering, in the light of that kind of thing, are we seeing any new applications arising from businesses' ambitions in achieving sustainability? I think I'd like to put that question to Oliver, please.
Yeah, of course, no problem. So the last few years, we've seen quite a few applications being developed by startup businesses, both here in the UK and globally. One of in particular is kind of really taking off, which is using robotics within the sortation of waste in recycling plants, for example. So it's actually someone's job to stand there all day and try and pick out the milk bottles alone from a huge waste stream, and it's not the most fulfilling of tasks, as you might imagine. But what we can do is use robotics and use special vision systems to identify materials, and use potentially AI to actually drive those robots to the right location on those moving conveyor belts full of waste to pick out the high value materials that might be useful for recycling or used for recycling and actually and get the value. I think at one point, sort of during the pandemic, milk bottles were £500 a ton, which is a crazy number when you think it's a used milk bottle. But it's got a huge value to someone, and if it's taking that waste out of a stream that may go to landfill, then that's a really beneficial use of automation. There are loads of applications that have been developed around sort of using automation to help support sustainability goals. And say we as a business, with the products we develop, and you look across the rest of the automation equipment suppliers in the UK and globally, everyone is focused on energy usage, making sure the product is available for a long period of time. Typical lifetime of a robot might be 15, 20 years. If it can perform a task 24/7 for that sort of length of time, it's got real value.
Great, thank you. George, did you have any interesting applications that had arisen from sustainability?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's one in particular where we're working with a customer who they produce alley extrusions. And one of the tasks that they have is making sure that the right product is going into the furnaces at the right time. And because if you heat up one of these billets, it changes its chemical characteristics or metallurgical characteristics. And therefore, you can't just assume you can stick it back in the other side again and reheat it and put it back through. It changes the product. So if it comes through the other end and it's the wrong product at the wrong time, it goes in the bin. Fortunately, it's a recycling bin, but it still goes in the bin. You've wasted all of that energy in heating that product up to just throw it away. And it's not unique to that. There's companies that I've gone into that use a spot welding process, but they're not using automation to control the spot weld. It's a manual pedestal gun that they're using. And this particular company freely admitted that 60% of what they make goes in the skip. Yeah, and that's just crazy, because we then have to generate all of that extra energy to put that material back into the scheme of things again. It just, simple automation can make a big difference, whether it's a robot putting billets into the furnace at the right time, whether it's a process where you're mixing recyclable and non-recyclable plastics together and making a usable product, or whether it is using a robot for spot welding applications or putting adhesives down. That's another big one. Mm-hmm. The list goes on and on and on.
Yeah. And we've just had another question come in. It's not specifically about sustainability, but it's in European countries such as Germany, automated recycling has been mainstream for at least 10 years. What do you think is holding us back in the UK from accelerating our automation, aside from cost? I'm going to go to Nikesh with that one and see if Oliver has anything to add to that afterwards.
Sure. I think we're almost, with that question, getting into a whole different topic, which we'll probably need a few hours for that discussion, regarding the barriers to adoption of digital technologies in the UK. I think that's what that question really stems around, and there's tons, from costs to lack of knowledge, to lack of education, to leadership, to understanding the return on investment of these products, of these investments. There's a lot that goes behind the barriers, and that really is business specific to what each individual business has in their goals and what might not be prevalent to them as a goal. So they might not be seeing that some adoption of automation might return a particular investment that they might require, so it becomes a barrier. So there are a whole range of barriers that we can discuss around that area. And using Germany as an example is very difficult, because they are very far ahead in a lot of ways, and so there's a lot that we can learn from our European affiliates in many ways. We're doing our best we can to try and align ourselves with the European directives, as I mentioned earlier, but there's a lot that the UK does have that does restrict that. And there's that is a whole wider conversation to be had. So I don't want to get into all of that too much, but you're correct in saying that there's little things like legislation. For example, I know Germany have a legislation about fibre optic cabling, which we don't have in the UK, and that's one which actually reduces the amount of cabling on certain connections, and that is with wider goals of being more efficient, having faster connectivity, but also reducing the amount of wiring that you have. So that in itself helps you on your journey towards your sustainability goals. So those sorts of things are law in other countries, which they are not here. They are more guidelines that we should follow. as opposed to have to follow. So that causes a lot of loopholes or grey areas for businesses as to not know what they should do or what they have to do. So the barriers can be sprung up in all sorts of areas there. So just look at the right problems that you have and the right application to solve it will help that. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that.
Okay, great, thanks. And to you, the same question, Oliver, maybe perhaps briefly, because as we said, it's a whole different subject area, really.
So much so that he didn't want to answer.
No, it's an awful question. Okay, let's move on from this. Okay, so this is quite an interesting one. Someone's saying here, we have knowledge in lean management, Six Sigma optimization, how to be more productive in processes, etc. And every organization has KPIs to measure them. What sort of KPIs do you believe we should have to measure how sustainable your business or product is? Does anyone want to take that one? What KPIs that we should be looking at for sustainability?
I'll have a go at it. I'm sure I can mess it up same as everybody else. The whole process of Six Sigma and Lean and Kaizen, whatever word you want to put on it, is about continuous improvement. So you're always evaluating what you're doing. And I think in general, using that process for automation, whether that is you're taking your first steps into automation or you need to improve what you're doing. And it's not just with automation, you can use it in any aspect of your business. I first learned about Six Sigma, I want to say in the early 90s when I was in the military. And the process behind it then, it was called different, of course, being military, but you can use it for almost anything. So if you want to look at a sustainability or a waste management, is the control measure we put in place, is that working? Yes or no? Yes, it is, or not the way we expected it to. Okay, well, if we change it like this, how's that going to help? You go through your evaluation period. You're never going to get it right the first time. And I think a prime example of that is when we're looking to electrify all of our cars. Is that the right answer to the question? Probably not, but it is a step. And it's something that we need to go through the pain of initially to make sure that we have the right answer going forward. It's not necessarily, one size fits all. There's a one size fits most, but not fits all. And it's the same with waste management solutions. I hope I didn't destroy that too badly.
Ian, did you want to say something? Or...
Oh, just totally with George, just add one thing. When you think you found the right answer, keep going on. Is it still the right answer? And that's quite important because things change. Like George was hinting that he likes his diesel car earlier, because we all thought that was the right solution. We're going to electric now. That does mean it's the right solution for local emissions, but it certainly means a lot more CO2 emissions at the moment, total. So if you're talking about climate change, you wouldn't be going electric cars. If you've gone about local emissions, you would. So therefore, you need to be very careful, again, of what we're doing, take it in the round, and keep saying, what is it we're trying to achieve? And has that changed itself? Because they are changing the targets all the time.
Great. Okay, so someone here is obviously playing devil's advocate and asking, are there any examples where automation has had negative impact on sustainability or net zero goals? Does anyone want to take that one off? Probably not. I think. Oh, go on then, Ian.
I could be horrible and say no.
Yeah, and apart from net zero only works when all life has died, according to the white paper's math. If you run the maths on the white paper, so I wouldn't be too keen to say automation, we've proved, helps net zero, because net zero itself is probably not a thing that we want if we want to reduce global warming, and if we want sustainability, it's probably not a thing we want. So I think I'm saying the same as George, but again, just be careful. Just say, oh, to achieve net zero. Well, hang on a minute. Think about that one first.
Okay, so we've got about just about 5 minutes left. So what other factors should we be looking at in relation to automation and sustainability? I've got some points here: power generation, modular house building, power storage systems. Obviously, power generation and like a decentralized grid are quite hot topics at the moment, and can also be, they're great example uses of digitalisation as well. Did anyone want to talk about power generation? Take that one on. Ian again?
Well, power generation, digitalisation or computing allowed the market to become the competitive thing it is now. And it allowed trading to get a more efficient system. So the digitalisation has absolutely transformed the power industry. It just couldn't operate as it does now without computing, as opposed to robotics, but it made a massive difference. Talks about decentralisation of generation. It's a bit of a side issue, to be honest. The key thing with all automation and all the robotics we're talking about is they do use power. So it's not about making the power, but they all use it. And it all comes down to, if we're going to increase the amount of electricity we're going to use, or energy, use more energy in the form of electricity, we've got to make sure that our electricity itself is, if we want to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, is carbon dioxide emission into the atmosphere free. All this about reduced use of fossil fuels isn't the issue. The issue is about emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And so when somebody says, oh, I've got a new automated system and it's using electricity, it may actually be using less, creating less CO2 than the human beings that were doing it. But all the time, remember that when if you're using electricity, it's got to be made somewhere. And just because you've got a contract that says it's renewable means absolutely nothing. It all comes down to get your systems as efficient as possible so you use the least amount of electricity. And we've got to, as a global, across the world, get our electricity production, carbon dioxide emission into atmosphere free.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've literally got a couple of minutes left. Has anyone got any closing comments that they would like to make before we close off the session today? I don't know, George, as chair of BARA, what's your kind of view? Are we where we need to be in terms of moving towards sustainability with using automation?
I think we're making the right steps. There's a lot more that we could do. Charlotte, you've heard me say several times where, if you go around factories in Europe, everyone is very keen to show you their very highly efficient, spangly new bit of kit. And you go around to any factory here in the UK, and they're very quick to show you the oldest piece of equipment they have and the fact that they can keep it running. both have their credibility with regard to sustainability and reducing our energy usage, you know, but which is right? And I think the answer is both of them. You know, I'm a big believer in make, do, and mend, but then there comes a point where we do need to change. And one of the things that we can all do to make that change is to look at how we produce things. You know, do we need to have it produced halfway across the world? Can it be produced locally in a sustainable manner? And again, there is no one answer that is the right answer. I think there's a mix of lots of different things.
Perfect. That seems like a really good point to end on. And we've also run out of time. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of the panelists. I think it was a really interesting conversation today, and I hope that the audience got a lot out of it as well. Also a note to look out for the next BARA webinar, which is going to be on cobots, which is going to be at some time in April. And just a quick reminder that there's going to be a survey that pops up after we have left the screen, and it would be great if everyone could take a few moments to fill that in. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.